Welcome. Um, when you look at the landscape of modern pop music, particularly the ecosystem of reality television competitions, the failure rate is, well, it's exceptionally high.
It is.
It is an industry designed for moments, not careers. We are very accustomed to seeing a winner crowned, a single released, perhaps one album, and then a quiet fade into obscurity. Today, we are analyzing a complete anomaly in that system. We are looking at the formation, commercial dominance, and eventual strategic hiatus of the British girl group Little Mix.
It is a case study that defies almost every statistical model we have for manufactured pop acts. Usually these groups have a shelf life of perhaps 3 years maximum.
Right.
Little Mix operated at the highest level of the industry for over a decade. We are talking about a group that has sold over 75 million records worldwide. That figure does not just make them successful for a reality show act. It places them among the best-selling girl groups in the history of the music industry.
That is exactly the distinction we need to make right at the start. So for everyone listening, this isn't just a story about a TV show. This is a story about brand management, crisis navigation, and the breaking of industry records that had stood since the era of the Spice Girls.
Exactly.
We're going to trace this entire arc for you today. We will look at the rather chaotic way they were formed on the X Factor in 2011, which was far from a sure thing. We will examine the data behind their chart performance, the internal shifts, including the departure of a founding member, and the business decisions that led to their hiatus in 2022.
To understand how they achieved this, we have conducted a comprehensive review of their discography, the specific chart data from the UK official charts and the US Billboard charts, industry certification awards, and public records regarding their touring revenue and business ventures.
The mission here is clear.
Yes. The mission is to analyze how 4 individuals with no prior connection built a brand that outlasted the very machinery that created them.
Let's begin at the inception point. The year is 2011. The setting is the 8th series of the UK version of the X Factor. Now, usually when you think of a band formed on a show like this, you assume the producers spot the chemistry immediately. They put them in a room, and it clicks.
But that is not what happened here.
Not at all. Perry Edwards, Jade Thirlwall, Leanne Pinnock, and Jesy Nelson did not walk into that audition room as a group.
No, there were 4 distinct soloists. They auditioned individually. At the time, the judging panel consisted of Louis Walsh, Gary Barlow, Talisa, and Kelly Rowland. Each of the 4 members passed their initial audition, but the data shows they hit a wall very quickly.
They did?
They all failed the first challenge of the boot camp section of the competition. In a standard year, based on the show's format, that would be the end of their involvement.
It is really interesting to look at the mechanics of what happened next, because the show didn't just immediately put the 4 of them together and say, here is your supergroup. It was a much messier process. They were essentially used as spare parts to fill out other groups.
Correct. The judges saw vocal potential, but did not have a clear vision yet. So they placed the girls into 2 separate ensembles during the group boot camp stage. Perry Edwards and Jesy Nelson were placed in a 4-member group called Faux Pas.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Jade Thirlwall and Leanne Pinnock were placed in a 3-member group called Orion.
And even these second-chance groups were failures.
They were. Both Faux Pas and Orion failed to advance to the judges' houses stage. So statistically, these 4 women had been rejected from the competition twice before the live shows even began.
Twice rejected.
Yes.
Okay.
It was a chaotic start. The decision to recall them was a last-ditch effort by the producers. They called back 2 members from each of those failed groups to form a new 4-piece unit.
For a long time, the narrative was simply that the judges decided this collectively. But footage that was released much later, specifically in 2022, gave us a look into the specific room where that decision was made.
That footage was significant because it highlighted the role of Kelly Rowland. While Talisa eventually became their mentor, Kelly Rowland was the specific judge instrumental in this final combination.
She saw something the others missed.
She identified the vocal chemistry. She saw that these 4 specific timbres, Edwards, Nelson, Thirlwall, and Pinnock, would create a harmonic blend that the other configurations lacked.
So they are formed, originally under the name Rhythmics. They go to the judges' houses, they get through to the live shows. They make an immediate impact with a performance of Nicki Minaj's Super Bass. Gary Barlow, who was often the critical voice on the panel, praised them highly. But just as they were gaining momentum, they hit a legal hurdle.
This was the Rhythmics controversy. It is a classic example of a large entertainment entity failing to do basic due diligence regarding trademarks.
Which happens more often than you would think.
It does. In October 2011, during the live competition, it emerged that there was a Brighton-based children's music charity also named Rhythmix. This was not a dormant company. It was an active charity working with vulnerable young people.
And the optics of a massive TV show attempting to trademark the name of a charity.
They were terrible.
Right.
The charity contested the trademark attempt. A spokesman for the X Factor eventually stated that, at the request of the charity, the members decided to change their name.
But they didn't technically have to, did they?
It is important to note that reports at the time suggested there was no strict legal requirement for them to change immediately. They could have fought it in court. However, the potential for negative public relations was simply too high.
The damage to the brand would have been irreversible.
Exactly. They made the change to avoid difficulties for the charity. On October 28, 2011, they officially adopted the name Little Mix.
With the branding crisis averted, they had to focus on the history of the show itself. Historically, girl groups were the first to be eliminated. The public simply did not vote for them. You have to wonder what the internal expectations were at that point.
The historical data is very clear on this. Before Little Mix, the most successful girl groups on the show were the Conway Sisters in Series 2 and Hope in Series 4.
Yeah.
Both of those acts were eliminated by week 7. No girl group had ever made it to the final, let alone won. On November 20, 2011, Little Mix became the first girl group in the show's 8-year history to progress past that 7th live show benchmark.
That was the moment industry analysts realized this might be different.
Yes.
There was a specific performance that shifted the public perception, which was their cover of Don't Let Go by En Vogue.
That performance occurred in the 7th live show, precisely when previous groups had failed. It showcased their ability to handle complex R&B harmonies live without backing tracks hiding their vocals. It built the momentum that carried them to the final on December 11th, 2011.
And when they were announced as the winners, they became the first group ever to win the UK series.
Correct.
Their winner single was a cover of Cannonball by Damien Rice. It is an acoustic ballad-heavy track, which is quite a departure from the high-energy pop they performed on the show.
It was a strategic choice to showcase vocal ability over production. It was released digitally on December 11 and physically on December 14th. Predictably, it topped the UK singles chart on December 18th, 2011.
And it secured the Christmas #1 spot on the Irish singles chart as well.
It did. But winning the show is the easy part. The real challenge is the transition from contestants to recording artists.
This brings us to the period between 2012 and 2013. This is where most reality show winners fail. The management team behind Little Mix, however, made some very aggressive moves immediately following the win.
They did not wait. In May 2012, months before an album was ready, they reportedly signed a deal with Vivid and Bravado to release signature products including dolls, puzzles, and accessories.
It is unusual, right?
Highly unusual. Usually, labels wait to see if the debut original single is a hit before investing in manufacturing plastic dolls. This merchandising push indicated a supreme confidence in their marketability to a young demographic.
But they couldn't just sell dolls. They had to prove they were musicians. There was still a stigma attached to the X Factor, that the acts were manufactured and couldn't really sing outside of a television studio.
To combat that, the group utilized social media, which was becoming a dominant force in music marketing. They uploaded an a cappella cover of Beyoncé's End of Time to YouTube.
That was a smart move.
It was very strategic. It stripped away the stage lights and the production. It was just 4 voices. It received significant public praise and served to validate their talent to skeptics who hadn't watched the TV show.
That setup paved the way for their debut original single, Wings.
Wings was released in August 2012. It debuted at #1 in the UK. But for the long-term viability of the group, the domestic chart position was less important than the international data.
Because they needed to prove they could export the music.
Yes. Wings charted at #3 in Australia and, crucially, reached number 79 on the US Billboard Hot 100. Breaking into the US Hot 100 is notoriously difficult for UK pop acts.
And this leads to the release of their debut album, DNA, in November 2012. It performed well in the UK and Ireland, reaching the top 3. But the real story here is the North American strategy. They didn't just release the album on iTunes and hope for the best. They signed a deal with Columbia Records.
The Columbia deal was vital for radio distribution in the U.S. When DNA was released in the U.S., it reached #4 on the Billboard 200 chart. We need to pause on the significance of that number.
Yes, please explain that context for the listener.
Reaching #4 set a record for the highest chart entry for a debut album by a British girl group. It broke the record previously held by the Spice Girls.
That is the comparison that follows them everywhere, the Spice Girls. To break a record held by them on your first attempt is a massive statement of intent.
It proved that the British girl group export model was viable again. They followed up with singles like Change Your Life and How Ya Doin', which featured Missy Elliott.
Which is a huge feature for a debut album.
It was. And the How Ya Doin' video is another example of their business acumen. It was heavily integrated with a sponsorship deal for Schwarzkopf hair dye, specifically the Live Color XXL line. They were monetizing the content on multiple levels.
As we move into 2013 and 2014, we see the group beginning to assert more creative control. This is the Salute era. They had the pop hits, but they wanted to pivot the sound.
In March 2013, they gave interviews stating they wanted a more R&B sound. They cited influences like Eve and Gwen Stefani. This wasn't just them asking for different backing tracks. The group co-wrote much of the Salute album.
They were getting into the architecture of the music.
They were heavily involved in the studio, shaping the top lines and the lyrical content.
And they brought in some heavy hitters on the production side to achieve that specific R&B texture.
They collaborated with producers like Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. For context, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis are the architects of Janet Jackson's sound.
Right.
Working with them signals a serious commitment to authentic R&B. The lead single, Move, released in late 2013, was a risk.
Because of how it was structured.
Yes. It has a very unconventional structure. It doesn't have a traditional big chorus in the way Wings did. But it peaked at number 3 in the UK and was certified gold. It proved their audience would follow them into more experimental territory.
During this era, they also ramped up the philanthropic side of their brand.
They released Little Me as a single, which was lyrically focused on fan empowerment and self-reflection. They also recorded the official single for Sport Relief 2014, a cover of Cameo's Word Up. This kept them in the primetime television spotlight in the UK.
However, there was a significant change in their touring schedule during this time. They had a headlining tour, the Salute Tour, but there was a situation with the North American leg. You often see bands push through exhaustion to tour America, but they made a different choice.
Yes, the North American leg was canceled. The official reason given was that the group needed to prioritize recording the next album.
That has to be a tough call to make in the boardroom.
It is a difficult decision for any management team. You are trading immediate touring revenue for the potential future revenue of a new album. They decided that maintaining the momentum of their release schedule was more important than servicing the U.S. live market at that specific moment.
That decision to focus on the studio takes us into the Get Weird and Glory Days era, spanning from 2015 to 2017. If Salute was about critical acclaim, this era was about pure commercial dominance.
The Get Weird era kicked off with Black Magic in May 2015. This track was a return to pure pop. It was a massive commercial turning point. It debuted at number 1 in the UK and stayed there for 3 weeks.
Why is that 3-week statistic important for you to highlight?
Because the charts move very fast in the streaming era. For a girl group to hold the top spot for multiple weeks is rare. It was the first time a girl group had done that in the UK since the Sugar Babes in 2007.
That is an 8-year gap.
It is. Black Magic also broke ground in the US, peaking at 67 on the Billboard Hot 100. To this date, that remains their highest peaking single in the United States.
The album Get Weird also continued their streak of consistency in the American market.
It reached number 13 in the US. This gave Little Mix a unique distinction. They became the only UK girl group to have their first 3 albums debut in the top 15 of the Billboard 200. In the UK, Get Weird became their best-selling album at that time, moving over 600,000 units.
But if Get Weird was a hit, Glory Days, released in 2016, was a blockbuster. This album cycle really cemented their status as the biggest group in the UK. It started with Shout Out to My Ex.
Shout Out to My Ex was a phenomenon. It debuted at number 1. In its opening week, it achieved the biggest opening week download sales for any song in the UK in 2016.
It just dominated everything.
It wasn't just a hit, it was the dominant track of the year. It subsequently won Best British Single at the 2017 Brit Awards.
The album Glory Days followed suit. It debuted at number 1 in the UK, and again, we saw records falling that it stood for 20 years.
The album achieved the highest first-week sales for a UK girl group number 1 album since the Spice Girls in 1997. But the longevity is even more impressive. Glory Days spent 5 weeks at number 1.
5 weeks.
That was the longest reign for a girl group studio album since the Spice Girls' debut album. By November 2017, the album had sold over 1.6 million copies worldwide.
To support an album of that magnitude, the touring demands increased significantly.
They were working constantly. In 2017, they supported Ariana Grande on the Dangerous Woman tour in North America.
That is brilliant placement.
It was a highly strategic support slot. It put them directly in front of Ariana Grande's massive pop demographic. Following that, they headlined their own Glory Days tour and the Summer Hits Tour 2018. They were playing arenas consistently.
By 2018, we enter the LM5 era. This is where the story becomes more complex. We see artistic maturation, but we also see significant industry politics and conflicts surfacing.
The fifth studio album, LM5, was released in 2018. The lead single was Woman Like Me, featuring Nicki Minaj. Commercially, it was successful, debuting at number 5 on the UK charts and peaking at number 2. The video won Best British Video at the 2019 Brit Awards.
But the release was overshadowed by what was happening in the boardroom.
It was. This was the split from Sicko music.
Right, and for anyone listening who doesn't know the background, this was a major disruption. Just days before the album was scheduled to drop, it was announced that the group was splitting from Simon Cowell's label, Sicko Music. You have to understand, Sicko was the label that formed them. Simon Cowell was the architect of their career.
For an act to leave their creator's label days before a major release is almost unheard of in the modern industry.
What was the reasoning behind that split?
The reports indicated that the label was no longer working effectively with the group's management company, Modest Management. There were disputes over creative direction and credit. Consequently, the album LM5 was serviced by RCA, UK, and Columbia Records moving forward.
It was a declaration of independence, essentially.
It was, but it certainly complicated the album rollout.
And if the label drama wasn't enough, the single Woman Like Me dragged them into a very public feud between two of the biggest rappers in the world.
This was the conflict between Nicki Minaj and Cardi B. After the song was released featuring Minaj, Cardi B claimed that the song had been sent to her first and that she had passed on it.
Which is a very sensitive issue.
Very. In the world of hip-hop and pop features, being labeled the second choice is a point of contention.
How did Little Mix handle that? They were essentially caught in the crossfire between these two massive artists.
They had to clarify the situation via social media to protect their relationship with Minaj. They stated that while their label had approached both rappers to gauge interest, Nicki Minaj had always been their first choice and a longtime dream collaborator.
So they de-escalated it.
They managed to navigate it, but it distracted from the music itself.
Despite the noise, they continued to work. They embarked on LM5 The Tour, which covered 40 shows in Europe. They also released their first Christmas single, One I've Been Missing, in 2019.
This brings us to 2020, the confetti era. This period was defined by two massive external forces, the global pandemic and the internal rupture of Jesy Nelson leaving the group.
Let's look at the pandemic response first. The entertainment industry practically shut down overnight, but Little Mix remained surprisingly active.
They did not go silent. They were in the middle of filming a reality show called Little Mix: The Search for BBC One. The concept was that they were now the judges, mentoring new bands.
It was a full circle moment for them.
It was. Musically, they released singles like Breakup Song and Holiday during the strict lockdowns. This required significant adaptation. The videos for these tracks were often animated or filmed remotely in their homes to comply with safety regulations.
The album Confetti was eventually released in November 2020.
Leanne Pinnock described it as their biggest album. It produced another massive hit, Sweet Melody, which eventually reached #1 in the UK in January 2021. But the promotional cycle for this album was fundamentally different because of what was happening with Jesy Nelson.
In November 2020, there was an initial announcement that Nelson would take an extended hiatus.
The initial statement cited medical reasons. Fans noticed she was absent from the final of The Search and the MTV Europe Music Awards. Then, on December 14, 2020, the permanent departure was confirmed.
The statement released regarding her departure was very specific about the reasons, which I think is important to note.
It was. Nelson cited mental health struggles. She specifically mentioned the constant pressure of being in a girl group and living up to expectations.
It really highlighted the intense scrutiny these women had been under for nearly a decade.
It did. It brought the human cost of their longevity into sharp focus.
This left Perry Edwards, Leanne Pinnock, and Jade Thirlwall. In many cases, when a founding member leaves a successful group, especially one built on vocal harmonies, the group dissolves. But they made a quick decision to continue.
They announced they would continue as a trio. And if we look at the data from the trio era, spanning 2021 to 2022, it was not a period of decline. In fact, it was a period of sustained achievement and critical recognition.
One of the most significant moments of this era was the Brit Awards in 2021.
That was a historic night. They won the Brit Award for British Group. It is shocking when you look at the archives, but they were the first girl group in the 41-year history of the awards to win that specific category.
Not even the Spice Girls won that.
Not even the Spice Girls or Girls Aloud had won British Group. It was a massive validation of their longevity and their impact on British music.
They also continued to perform incredibly well on the charts.
In July 2021, they released Heartbreak Anthem, a collaboration with Galantis and David Guetta. With that track, they became the first girl group to accumulate 100 weeks inside the top 10 of the UK singles chart.
That is an immense metric of consistency.
It is incredibly hard to achieve. Later that year, in November, they released a greatest hits album titled Between Us to celebrate their 10-year anniversary.
But as the 10-year anniversary celebrations wound down, the announcement came that marked the end of this chapter.
On December 2, 2021, the group announced they would be taking a hiatus. Note the terminology. They did not say break up or split.
Right, the wording is very deliberate there.
They called it a hiatus to recharge and work on solo projects. They emphasized strongly that they were not splitting up permanently and planned to reunite in the future.
They concluded with one final tour, the Confetti Tour.
The tour concluded in May 2022 at the O2 Arena in London. It was a massive production. A notable statistic from this tour comes from their dates in Scotland. They were awarded a special plaque for playing the most dates and having the highest all-time ticket sales at Glasgow's OVO Hydro Arena.
And they made sure the fans who couldn't be there got to see it.
The final show was live-streamed globally as Little Mix the last show for now.
Now that we have the full timeline laid out for you, from the first audition to the final bow at the O2, we need to analyze the broader picture. What was the artistic identity of Little Mix?
Musically, they operated primarily in the pop, R&B, and dance pop spheres. However, they were very adaptable, incorporating tropical house and Latin pop influences when those genres trended.
But the core was always the vocals.
The core of their identity was vocal technique. All three remaining members possess a 3-octave soprano range. They are particularly noted for their ability to execute complex vocal harmonies live, which set them apart from many of their contemporaries who relied more heavily on backing tracks.
Lyrically, they also carved out a specific niche.
Their catalog frequently addresses themes of feminism, gender equality, body positivity, and sexism. Songs like Salute and Power are viewed as empowerment anthems.
Which allowed them to grow with their audience.
Exactly. This lyrical content allowed them to maintain relevance as the cultural conversation around these topics evolved over the decade.
We should also discuss their advocacy and their relationship with specific communities.
They have a very significant following within the LGBTQ+ community. They were awarded the Changemakers Award at the Attitude Awards in 2018. Their song Secret Love Song, particularly the ballad version, is widely regarded as a gay anthem.
They also faced a fair amount of criticism over the years, particularly from certain sections of the media regarding their image.
There was recurring scrutiny regarding their stage costumes, with critics calling them too revealing. The group was very direct in their response.
They didn't back down from that.
They did not. They consistently shut down sexist critics, asserting autonomy over their image. They framed their clothing choices as a matter of personal confidence and feminist agency, rather than something done solely for the male gaze.
We touched on the Dolls earlier, but their business portfolio was much broader than that. They were a brand as much as a band.
It was extensive. They understood the value of licensing. They partnered with M&M's for Union Flag branded candy in 2012. They launched a children's clothing line with Primark.
They really covered all the bases.
They released multiple fragrances such as Gold Magic and Wishmaker, which are high-margin products. They had makeup lines like LMX Beauty and skincare partnerships with Simple. They were a diversified lifestyle brand.
And they leveraged this platform for philanthropy.
They did significant work with sport relief and comic relief. This went beyond just donating money from record sales. They participated in physical challenges. Thirlwall and Pinnock climbed Mount Kilimanjaro for charity.
That kind of physical commitment really resonates with the British public.
It does. It shows a level of dedication that goes beyond writing a check.
So, when we summarize their standing in the industry, what are the final numbers we are looking at?
The headline number is estimated sales of over 75 million records worldwide. Forbes has named them one of the most influential acts in Europe.
That is incredible.
They ranked on the Sunday Times Young Rich list for multiple consecutive years. On streaming platforms, they remain one of the most streamed girl groups on Spotify, with billions of streams across audio and video platforms.
It is a truly remarkable narrative. You are looking at a group that started with 4 failed solo auditions. They were thrown together by judges, forced to change their name mid-competition to avoid a charity lawsuit, and still became the only girl group to win the UK X Factor. From there, they evolved into one of the best-selling girl groups in history.
Their success really relied on adaptability. They adapted their sound from pure pop to R&B and back again. They adapted their business model to the streaming era as CD sales declined.
And they adapted to internal crisis.
Yes, they adapted to the loss of a founding member without collapsing. Their ability to maintain a united front regarding social issues also allowed them to connect with a generation of fans in a way that created deep, lasting loyalty.
As of now, the members are pursuing their solo work following the 2022 hiatus. Whether they reunite remains to be seen, but the mark they left on the British music industry is permanent. I encourage you to look at how modern groups are formed today. You will see the blueprint Little Mix left behind. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of their career. Thanks for listening.